Good day, podcast community. Happy New Year. It's a special day, and we have a special guest on. I'm Pete Kane, Podcast Pete, and a lifestyle coach. And we get a chance to have a person who is a retired Marine veteran on New Year's Day. So you get something really special, and his story is special. So, Cornelius, tell our viewers who you are, what you do, and who you serve, and then we'll get into our podcast and your story.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me here today. My name is Cornelius
Absolutely.
Gamble. I'm the founder of Pressure Tested Global, and I am the executive performance coach, in addition to a leadership advisor and a public speaker. So my
Awesome.
goal is to serve the corporate world when it comes to dealing with leadership and resilience. The goal is to help be able to enhance engagement. I'm noticing a lot of data that supports how disengaged people actually are, which is crazy. It's like
Yes.
nearly 70%. And we spend most of our time at the place we're employed, and also to increase productivity and reduce, and also to increase retention.
Man, you're like speaking to my heart because I see it every day and I totally agree with you. So let's go back to your military career. What made you want to sign up for the Marines?
Yes, so I actually never had a desire to do military at all. I was
Mm-hmm.
17 years old when I graduated high school, and my plan was to become a sheriff's deputy. But when I walked into the sheriff's department to put in my application at 17, she told me, that wasn't going to work. So she gave me two options. She said, you have to be 21. And what we'll do is you could join the military to get some experience, or you can go to college. College was not my goal at the time. And so I said, okay, if this is the next step I need to take to help me accomplish my goal to be a sheriff, then I'll just go into the military. And so I explored my hand at looking through the different branches, and
Mm-hmm.
none of it fit with me. When I walked to the Marine Corps recruiter's office, I told him, like, if you could tell me the truth, tell me what no one wants to hear, I'll join. And he did just that. So,
Ooh. That is great. I love that story. What do you think? What changed the way you're leading, the way you're coaching, the way you're taking your skills that you learned in the military and the Marines to what you're doing now? Like what helped you?
personal experience and a lot of observation throughout my time in the Marine Corps. I realized how vitally important effective leadership is and servant leadership is. And I just observed and noticed that the way we communicate with those that we have the responsibility to look out for plays a big role in their performance. And once
Mm-hmm.
I retired from the Marine Corps, I started doing some research here locally in the metro Atlanta area to kind of figure out what the data looked like. And it was pretty alarming to me to see the correlation between the military aspect of leadership and our performance, and also in the civilian world. And so I began a journey at that point to try to dissect what has worked throughout my career and develop a framework to be able to strip away, the uniform and just keep the aspects of truth that crosses all boundaries, more so on the human element. And so that's what led me to doing what I'm doing today.
I heard when you said, you stepped into the sheriff's office to serve. Whenever I hear on podcasts that people have that servant heart,
Mm.
they're different than others. I mean, it's just amazing. I'm in the Rotary Club up here in North Cobb, and we're impacting the community. We're serving. We're doing things that are really making a difference. What at 17, you usually don't have that kind of mindset. What prepared or what changed in that? Like you're stepping into a servant mindset. What was it growing up? Mentors, your parents? What do you think helped you to get that way?
Yeah, for sure. The thing that helped me get to wanting to be more of a servant is one. I think that there's an innate character of my DNA, first off.
Mm-hmm.
And the second part, I think what enhanced that is just being observative. And I noticed that people, even as a child growing up, people just needed a lot of help. I needed a lot of help, and I had this philosophy my entire life that it only takes one for someone to be able to create change.
Mm,
And I asked myself, instead of depending on other people to be that one, why don't I just step up and I become the one?
mm. That's great. What do you now? I know you have the pressure code framework. How does that? How do you give us a little our community an idea what that means and what you want to do with organizations and groups and people?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So the pressure code is my little baby. It is very simple system, actually right here behind me with the traffic light. And it's a
Hmm.
symbol that allows us to be able to be on a subconscious level reminded of it every single day. And so it starts off with the red, which is recognize. And what we do in this phase is we pause to identify what's happening on the internal. If my heart is elevated, is my breathing short and sporadic, and my palms sweaty? You kind of do like a self-assessment, become self-aware. From that moment, once we identify and recognize what's going on internally, we move on to the yellow, which is what I refer to as yield. At this stage, we're yielding to the idea of understanding and labeling that experience that we're having. And so, what pushed me to this point? And I want to dissect to figure out what led me to having these kind of emotional variances. Also, at this point of yield, I want to actually take time to breathe and assess my environment and situation to actually see what's at stake. Oftentimes, what I've seen is we go from red to green, and that's where the biggest shortfalls have been in my observation. And so, by implementing the yield process, it gives us that time for us to become cognitively aware of the decisions that we're making and the weight that they carry. Once we've identified that and we determine our next best step, we go on to green and we actually put that into action. And then we actually use effective tools of communication to communicate with our team to let them know what the expectation is, and also to allow for their type of feedback to us as well.
I love that. You know, about 3 years ago, a gentleman was at Rotary, and he asked a question I had never heard anybody ask about, and this was a educator. I think he was the assistant superintendent of the schools, and he asked, "What what are you doing today to teach emotional intelligence?" And it was like the first time I had heard that ever asked in public. I mean, I knew about it, but I never heard anybody bring it to the level to an educator. So, what does that mean to you? Because I know in the work you're doing, you're addressing that in the marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely. Emotional intelligence is vitally important. Emotional intelligence is actually the very first step I took in my journey to kind of figure out how to become better. What was happening is I returned from the war in Iraq, and I realized that traditional psychology and that type of medicine wasn't serving me. But I knew it had to be an answer. There had to be a way for me to improve and get better in my situation. So I jumped on Google, started doing some research, and it led me to emotional intelligence. My desire was just to learn how to improve myself. I had no intent on teaching anybody else. But once I began to see the powers and how drastically different my life began to be once I applied those simple steps, everything began to change. And then back to the idea of being the one to step up, I figured, why not teach what I now learned that I see worked in real time to other people? You see, I think when it comes to the idea of emotional intelligence, people think that you should control your emotions. My philosophy on that is different. I don't think you control the emotion. I think what is happening is that the emotion is showing up to give us a message. And that's where the yellow, the
Hmm.
yield on my framework comes from for the pressure code. What is the message that it's trying to teach me? Let me pay attention to that. Let me extract the valuable aspects of that, and then I'll move forward. See, emotions in essence, at its very purest form, is a construct, right? It's just the same way we label any and everything else, right? If you've ever heard a rose is still a rose, even if it call it by a different name, it's the same thing with our emotions. So we label it to disassociate it from being us, right? We don't want to accept the identity of what that emotion is, but what we should do is extract what information and knowledge is coming from that. And then from that, we have the ability to take our second best step. We're designed to survive, right? At our purest form, we're designed to survive. And so, you have something that occurs, you'll have, this emotion from that, and then you'll have your thoughts, and then you'll take action. What I've identified is that a lot of times the survival instinct is the reaction. But if we pause for a little bit, become aware of the emotional challenge that we're facing, we move
Mm-hmm.
from reaction to being able to respond. That would be kind of like how I would explain emotional intelligence, and the value I would give to others is we won't, I don't believe we'll ever get away in this lifetime truly mastering the emotion, right? They
Yeah, I
will come
agree.
up, and they will come up unexpected. What we have the ability to master is how we respond when we feel those triggers, or those emotions start to arise. And I think if we shift our focus to that a little bit more, takes us to the internal locus of control. It helps us relieve pressure of things that we truly cannot control, and start to
Mm-hmm.
focus and manage on what we actually can.
That is so good. Um, I've had a number of people on my podcast, and actually, this gentleman, he spoke at our Rotary, and I know I've been associated with the Army Rangers transitioning to civilian life, and about 8 or 9 years ago, when they started it, they would come out with a high level of skill. I mean, high level, and the private sector didn't know what to do. They were like, okay, we got a security guard, we got a security position here. And it was like such a mismatch because
Yeah.
you're managing teams, you're learning all the, it was just completely different than the civilian private sector was able to digest. And so he said this, he said, we all know about PTSD, and he said it's real, but what he has discovered, Pete, is the purpose. When we go on, we lack the growth and the purpose for our next chapter. And he said that purpose is so critical in anything we do, especially when you transition from
Mm,
one role to another. How did you like what how did you, because you seem like you made that transition better than most.
mm.
What was it like for you that you're transitioning out, you're taking your skills? How do you like set your goals and your purpose up to be able to get into that next chapter?
It's interesting. As a master mindset life coach, which is what my designation is, I had a terrible transition, honestly.
Hmm.
What I did great was my ability to rebound from what was the chaos I was experiencing, and that was also a realization that, like, regardless of titles, regardless of experience, regardless of education, like, the one thing that kind of unifies us all is that we're people, and we will go through this human experience. And so once I started to realize that I was having a difficult time, I had to just learn to accept that this was a difficult space. And then this is where all the tools and practices had to come into play. And I realized when I applied them, how I felt. I realized what happened when I didn't apply them and things got worse. And one of the biggest things was I was seeking community as well. So I reached out to Wounded Warrior Battalion for some support. I
Mm-hmm.
reached out to Vets for Warriors, which I'm an ambassador with right now because of my experience. They connected me with Warrior Path over in Camp Southern Ground area in Fayetteville, and I had the
Mm-hmm.
opportunity of going through that experience and that cohort with other veterans as well that were having a difficult time. And so, you talk about purpose. It's interesting because without purpose, we become like a leaf that's fallen off the tree that's been caught by the wind, right? We are
Mm-hmm.
just floating and existing and being carried whichever way life takes us. But when we have purpose, we have the ability to cut through that wind. Not that we won't feel it, but we are able to steer a little bit better in the direction that we want to head. And so one of my biggest things, what I would say to veterans or anybody going through a transitional space is oftentimes we try to speed it up. It's best that we slow it down. When I was training
Hmm.
for combat, before I went to the war, I had a Colonel, Kip Haskell. He would always say, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And initially, I didn't understand that. I was like, well, why would we want to move slow? If we move slow, that sets us up for a lot more danger. But what slow meant was you move at the fastest pace that you're capable of performing your highest, right? And that would be your slow and smooth. And so I now apply that aspect to everything else. So throughout that transition, I was trying to redefine my identity, but I was having a difficulty doing it because I wasn't accepting certain parts of the identity. And so when
Hmm.
I began to slow down, really do a self-analysis, become self-aware, present moment awareness practices were vitally important in that transition for me as well. I had to realize that I wasn't losing something by stepping out of a uniform, but I was given the opportunity to expand myself into a new chapter. And so instead of looking at it as a loss, it became an opportunity for tremendous growth.
Hmm. Yeah, there was a gentleman. He grew up at age 5. He found himself in a concentration camp in Russia, and he said that we were talking. I think about we might have been even talking about PTSD, but he said this: take the G and put G, take the D and replace it with G, growth. He said he got so he had to grow up so fast because at age 5 you're usually in pre-K and
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
safe environment. Here he's fighting for his life and everything. But he went on to do incredible things as a result of that growth. Where do you see how do you continue to grow each day? Because you are on a great track. There's so much burnout, there's so much other things out there. How does Cornelius grow?
Yes, growth mindset is the key to resilience, in my opinion, to the highest level. The opposite of growth mindset would be a fixed mindset, and
Hmm.
a lot of times through the science world is taught you have one or the other. The reality is we all carry both. It's just a matter of which one we choose to invest in more to get the greatest development. And so for me, the aspects of growth that I apply is having a system that I utilize. To me, everything works best in a system. When
Hmm.
I identify when I can figure out how something works, then there is no excuse for me not to be able to keep it working, right? And so I had to develop a system for myself. What works? What's my routine? What do I do? What tools can I apply in those moments when things are starting to get a little bit hectic, a little bit chaotic internally? It may not show on the external world yet, but what do I do for me?
Hmm.
And that I found, tools and practices such as meditation, breath work, aromatherapy. I would also do, some nature exercises. I'll go out or I'll journal. And I figured that what it did was it took me out of that mental space and allowed me to become more present. And once I became more present, going back to the framework, this gave me the clarity for what my next step would be. And
Hmm.
I strip away all of the other noise and I focus on what's the next best thing I can do right now in this moment that's going to take me in the path of who I want to become. And it's slow and incremental. I was I was on the side of a mountain one time, and I'll keep this portion pretty short. But I was climbing a mountain, and once I placed my hand up to kind of like pull myself up, a rock it came out, and I listened to this rock tumble down the side of this mountain, but I never heard it hit the bottom. And in that moment, like I froze for probably one of the few times in my life, but I just froze. Fear consumed me in a way that I never
Hmm.
imagined. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I'm just going to sit here until somebody comes to rescue me. And the moment I said that out loud, it clicked. Nobody's coming to rescue you. You have to rescue
Hmm.
yourself. And how do I, in this moment right now, rescue myself when this fear is so real? And in that moment, I realized all I had to do was step by step, you know, one reach, one step. one climb, one reach, one step, one climb. And that's all I could focus on. And that's what got me from the side of the mountain. And so I use that same kind of lesson from the side of the mountain to allow me to kind of continue to grow through aspects of life.
Man, that I love when I hear stories like that, because it is so critical that we those one step at a time. Fear is out there, and whether it controls us and is our decision. What would you say? Because I heard the number. I don't know what the percentage of burnout is. It's like it's high, but Monday morning, it's like 90%. It's so high, I was blown away. Dread the start of a week. And
Right.
so when I see, it's like, whoa, it's my favorite time. What would you say, what could you share with our community? Like, one about burnout, but one about your routine that you use to kind of propel you each day, each week, that would be helpful for us to share, or helpful for you to share with us.
Yes. So we burn out because we run out of fuel. It's just like if you jump in a car or an electric vehicle, whatever you want to refer to it as. But
Mm-hmm.
once you have a charge and it's depleted, that's where burnout is. Leadership, we think sometimes when these demands come on, oh, if I add more pressure, or if I bring in, this like level of motivation is going to get you through. But no, it doesn't. We have to, again, come back to the systems. Everything has to have a place. And without things having their place, this is where we start to have issues. And so the research I was doing says 1 in 4, 1 in 5 working adults are displeased with the work environment. I think that number is a little skewed. I'm pretty sure it's a lot higher than that. And I think what happens is we reach this burnout stage because, one, the pressure, all it's doing is revealing our unpreparedness. And it's revealing the lack of systems that we actually do have in place. And so when we wake up in the morning, life is already trying to extract everything from us from the moment we open our eyes. And so
Mm-hmm.
from the time we take a foot on the floor, if you're married, if you have kids, or, whatever responsibilities we have, it's always pulling. My question would be, when do we take the time to give back to ourselves? In the finances world, they say pay yourself first.
Mm-hmm.
But in this aspect, do we do that? And I find a lot of times we don't. We don't take time to recharge. We don't take time
Mm-hmm.
to just sit in peace, to get our thoughts out. It's always this go, this grind mentality. And it's really no surprise that we reach this phase of burnout. Additionally, not having a community or a space that we could feel safe to talk through these things makes it
Mm-hmm.
more challenging, because we then become isolated internally, even though we're surrounded by people. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that is one of the most dangerous spaces to be in. Is, you're surrounded by people, but yet you're still alone. The reality is, it kind of, to my experience, and why I wanted to share that it was a bumpy transition for me as well. Once we realize that other people are going through the suck, you know,
Mm-hmm.
um, it makes it a little bit better, because we realize that we're not alone. And in that, it's up to us to have the courage to create a sense of community, not to wallow in, the discomfort, but to embrace the discomfort and realize the same place that there's an obstacle is the opportunity. But we have to put those steps in place. Once we identify that we're feeling these emotions or that we're burning out, what's the issue with taking a pause? A 5-minute meditation. When I was a professor at the Marine Corps Staff Non-Commissioned Officer Academy, I would always do 5-minute meditation when the Marines would come in. And what's interesting is I had a lot of special forces, reconnaissance, and raiders would pull me aside and say, "Man, that 5 minutes of meditation before we start the class every day is exactly what I needed." So then I started to ask myself, how is it that the cream of our crop is finding so much value in just a 5-minute pause? And so I started doing research in that. And so I would highly encourage everybody. A lot of people would tell me like, oh, meditation doesn't work. Meditation doesn't work if we don't work it. It doesn't look
Mm-hmm.
the same for everybody, and it's not always sitting in silence. Find a form of meditation that works for you, that allows you to shed the pressure, so that way you can regain focus.
Yeah, that is, boy, that we're going to have to make a little clip out of that because it is so much. I used to be in social media years ago when it just started out, and people say social media, it's just media. It has
Yeah.
there's nothing social about being glued to a phone doing all this stuff. But here's where I have seen consumption versus creativity. We're
Mm.
consuming 4 hours of TV and over 2 hours of social scrolling. How do you stay creative and stay away from that sliding into it's almost like a force pulling us into consumption? How do you keep, like, I love meditating. I never meditated before I had a stroke. I never journaled before, but I have finished 17 journals. I do it every day. I have a routine. But how do you stay creative?
Yeah, great question. Disconnecting from the noise is what I refer to it as. When I was teaching
Hmm.
communications courses, what I talk about is you have the encoder and you have a decoder, right? The encoder is the person who is sending the message out. The decoder is the one to receive it. In between those two is the noise, and this is where distortion takes place. And so what happens is we are in a consumer society. And so, because we're in this consumer society, people are always pushing information to try to sell you something or gain something from you. And the brain is
Hmm.
the greatest supercomputer that has ever been. But the issue is we're always pushing it to process, but we don't take time to actually dissect what we've put into it. And so I disconnect a lot. I show up for what I need to show up for. And outside of those moments, I'm very intentional about giving myself something back to fill me back up. Um, my vice or what I do is nature. I built a meditation room here in my house right next to my office. And so I transition from here. I'll go sit in that meditation room. I'll listen to the waterfall and I'll just
Hmm.
sit in peace. I got rid of my active engagement on a lot of social media. And this is just what worked for me, right? But I took off all of the social media platforms that I realized weren't really serving me, but were just extracting my time. And I
Hmm.
converted that time I would spend on that to giving back to myself.
Ooh, yeah, I love that meditation room. Mine's the front porch, and I go
Mm,
out there and journal, and I just write, and I just take in, and I don't even hardly look at my phone. I mean, the
yeah,
only time I'm using the phone is talking to people
yeah,
because
yeah.
there is so much is we're disconnected to people and emotions. Connecting to people and having those meaningful conversations fills us up. I mean, whenever I get up early, I'm about a 3:30, 4 o'clock
Mm,
riser. And so when my energy is going down a little bit in the late afternoon, I get on the phone and talk to people, and it just kind of fires my energy back up. What would you say? You mentioned journaling. How has journaling helped you in your journey?
yeah, so journaling helps to bring about clarity. It also helps to, we refer to it as brain dumping. It allows us to get all of the noise inside of our head out of our body to be able to help slow the mind down. Would be the simplest and most direct way I would put it that it's found that I found it to be valuable. I also do a technique called write and burn, and so for individuals that think, oh, journaling and it's not my forte. Okay, fine. Write and burn. I'll set a 5 minute timer. I'll get a pen, a paper, or whatever I have, and I'll just write everything that comes to my mind on this sheet of paper. It doesn't have to, yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be spelled correctly. It doesn't have to be grammatically
Yes.
correct. Just get it out of my head. And once I've written it down, I set it. I love fire anyway, and so I burn it, and that helps me to find a lot of peace as well.
Wow. I love that. I love that. Yeah, I was grew up dyslexic and ADD. So
Mm,
I had that active brain and I never knew how to really channel it until I had to slow down 4 years ago when I had a stroke. It's like I had 49 days to think. And I never
mm,
had one
mm.
day to think. I would always be running it and just trying to keep up. So my question is like taking those, like, we see a lot of pressure out there with executives. So what do you try to do first to get them on track like you're talking about? Because these are such great strategies. Like when you sit down with an executive and their team, what are your first steps of really getting them to that mindset to start growing?
Yeah, the biggest thing that I do is what I used to do when I was in Iraq. Being in such a chaotic environment, there was very little time to find a sense of peace, in that. And I take that extraction of the knowledge from that, and I teach this back to the executives and their team by saying, right now in this moment, what is the next big thing, right? What is the goal that you're after? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Um, they give their opinions, and then from there, what are we doing actively that's helping us get there, right? And you'll hear a bunch of information, and a lot of it is not necessarily valuable to helping to accomplish that goal, right? And then we also identify that there's not a very systematic way of getting there. And when I say systematic, what I mean is, how do we have a process that if I were to be out of this position, these things could continue to happen just as fluidly, if not better, in my absence. And so once we identify that, we work together to start putting things in place that actually works for them. And then that's the I guess I would say the tactical side of it. And then on the
Mm-hmm.
mindset aspect, I work really big at helping to reframe the way we see things. Earlier, I mentioned that opportunity and obstacle, they lie in the same spot. And so if you've ever seen like the thin line between love and hate, all things are what we say they are. And what we believe is the perception that becomes real to us. And if we can reframe a situation, a lot of times I've realized that we can reduce some of that pressure and take a little bit more of that internal locus of control back. And then this starts to decrease this level of anxiety for things that haven't even happened yet, to give us a more clear processing aspect to take a step forward. And I want to correct something I mentioned earlier. I said that emotions and thoughts. I want to clarify that and put that in the right order in case anybody was taking notes. I don't want them to hold on to false information. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's thoughts that create the emotion, and the thoughts come from the reaction, right, or circumstances of
Mm-hmm.
observation. So I just wanted to make sure I clarify that before we moved on and closed out today.
Man, thank you so much. I wanted to be respectful of your time, and so I think that w- how can people get a hold of you? I know I'm gonna encourage my community to share this, get it out to people because we can all see the what's going on in culture today. I
Mm,
mean, it's like I don't think anybody is working on that mindset because they're reacting before they even think.
right,
What
right.
what how can people get a hold of you? And then I have one final question.
Yes, the best way to get a hold of me is just look me up on LinkedIn. That's
Okay.
primarily the only social media platform I'm on right now, besides my
Awesome.
podcast.
Awesome. So Cornelius, I'd love to have you back. I mean, because I could continue on because and this has been the best conversation. We do actually do live events every 60 days, and Jim, he's spoken a lot of mine. And so I want one connect you two together because he has the same mindset. I mean,
Mm,
whenever he's on the podcast, it's a special, and there's something different about people that have that journey that you two have been on that just creates a mindset that's different than most.
mm,
What would
mm.
you say is one thing that you would want our viewers to take home from our podcast today?
The biggest takeaway I would ask, or that my desire is that each individual realizes their true capability. Now, that may not happen from just watching this or observing it one time. It takes work, it takes time, and it takes intentional action and consistency. I was at a speaking event once, and somebody asked me, "When can I let off the throttle?" My answer is, "You never do." Right? You just
Yeah,
learn how to become steady, and
yeah.
by developing a system to put in place helps us become steady without the burnout. And so that would be my greatest takeaway.
Awesome. Man, this has been a real treat on New Year's Day. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, your journey, your ideas with our community. We really appreciate that.
Thank you for
And we
having me.
really appreciate you. Thank you so much.